All right. Hi, everyone, and welcome to our brand new State House 201 workshop. We are very excited to be giving you guys this deep dive into the legislature's website and how we're going to use that information, the resources we come up with in our advocacy in the future. So just to kind of go over what we're going to do today, we're going to start off with some quick introductions and icebreakers. Then we're going to go into the Massachusetts legislature's website and kind of go through different parts of that are really key when it comes to advocating on an issue. Then we'll go into legislating, advocating for your hard ask. So that means kind of just asking important questions, making key demands. And we'll end with some more information on power enforcement, stipend reform, and we'll have some time for questions at the end. But in the meantime, I'm going to hand it over to Scotia to give a quick intro for Act on Mass.
Hi, everybody. Um,
Hi.
from some familiar faces here, I'm sure that you're familiar with Act on Mass, but if we've got some new folks, I'll just give a little bit of an overview about what our work is. We're a 501(c)(4) nonprofit that was founded in 2018. We have a mission to strengthen democracy in Massachusetts by recentering constituent voices in the lawmaking process. That's hopefully what we're going to do tonight, just pass on some strong skills for being a constituent lobbyist. We fight for this mission through pushing for good government policies, such as some of the rules changes that were finally passed earlier this year after many years of organizing. We also monitor the State House, track progressive legislation, send out information through our weekly newsletter, The Saturday Scoop. And we strengthen grassroots advocacy through workshops like this one, information forums, etc. And we also endorse movement candidates during campaign season.
Mhm.
This summer, we've been up to Transparency on Tour. So you might have seen in the scoop or on our social media, we've been going all over the state with our goal to reach all 40 Senate districts. So far, we've done 28, so 12 more to go. We're taking a little pause while we're focused on the stipend reform campaign, but hoping that we'll be able to hit those remaining districts in the process of that. Might have some new faces on this call tonight that met us this summer, but that's been a wonderful thing that's been informing a lot of our organizing work. Um, I'm going to pass it back to Sydney for introductions.
Awesome. So before we begin, we're just going to ask you guys to put in the chat, since there's so many faces that we're seeing today, your name and pronouns, where you're at or from, an issue that you're passionate about, and if you'd like, you can add what you hope to get out of this workshop. So I can start by saying my name is Sydney. I'm the policy fellow here at Act on Mass, and I use she, her pronouns. I am in Somerville, and I am very passionate about transparency in the Massachusetts State House, but also a lot of other key issues as well. And I hope that you guys enjoy our new workshop. I hope that you guys learned something tonight. Um, and as you're kind of filling this out and putting it into the chat, I'm going to ask that when you're done with that, you open these web pages. So first, you're going to start off by going to the Massachusetts Legislature's website, which is malegislature.gov, and we'll send that out in the chat as well if you need some help navigating yourself to that. And I'm going to ask you to have four different tabs open if you'd like to follow along and click around as I'm going through it. But you can also just sit and watch and then take this information to use later on as well.
Yes, legislature. God, so
Yeah, I just popped that in the chat. So again, this is if you want to follow along on your own screen, but we'll be showing everything on our screen as well.
All right. Awesome. So as you guys are doing that, I'm just gonna ask you to also work open up this worksheet. It was sent out via email. So if you are opening it via email, that's going to be a docx document. But if you don't have access to that right now, that's totally fine. I can show you how to access it via this link right here. So it's going to be a bit.ly link, or you could also use a QR code if you'd like to access it through another device. And the way you're going to do that is once you go to the Google Doc, it'll look something like this, and you can go to File, make a copy, and then it'll take you to your own copy where you can edit and fill in information throughout the workshop, which is very important because you'll want to record all of the information you're finding out today. So I'll leave that
Yeah,
up
as
for
a
now.
reminder, that was also sent in the email. And this is something you can totally fill out at home after the workshop. We're going to send out the recording as well. But we thought it would be a helpful thing, make it a little bit interactive and follow along as we go. Also, it's kind of like having an in-person workshop. Like usually you get to have a little handouts. So we thought it would be nice. So maybe we can just get a thumbs up when folks are ready to go with the web pages if they want to have those open, and the worksheet if they want to fill that out as we go.
Can you say again the websites to open?
Yes.
The legislature and what else?
Yeah,
So
so it's
you can,
all different tabs on the legislature website. So just familiarizing yourself with some of the places we're going to go, but we're also going to show you this as we get there.
Mhm.
Okay, thanks.
All right. So now that you guys have some of these resources open and ready for the workshop, the first thing we're going to want to ask ourselves is who are our legislators and what do they do on Beacon Hill? Are they in the power structure of leadership? Are they on a specific committee? Things like that. And we'll go through this as we're going throughout the presentation as well. So
Also,
now going
just want to cut in and let folks know that if you have any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat as we're going. Either Sydney or I will be monitoring the chat the whole time. So feel free to pop in with questions, and then we'll have time for questions spoken at the end.
Yes. All right. So when you first go to the legislature's website, it's going to look like this. This is what the homepage looks like. And there's a lot of kind of information and things going on. But what we're going to want to focus on first and foremost is the legislators tab right here. So once you click on that tab, you're going to go over to legislators, down to find your legislators. And once you're here, you can put in your street address, so the address where you're registered to vote. And once you search, you can find your representative and senator pretty easily. It's nice to have them both in one spot. And when you click on their names, it's going to take you to their actual page. So you're going to get all the information, or I should say, most of the information you're going to need to fill out the worksheet at this time. You're going to see the email address for your representative. You're going to see the phone number that you can reach them at. And then you're also going to see the bills that they have sponsored and co-sponsored. So the bills that they have sponsored are bills that they have filed in this session, and then co-sponsored bills are bills that other representatives have filed, but that they are saying, I support this bill and signing their names onto. Another key part of this kind of profile is the committees tab. So under the committees tab, you're able to see what committees your representative or senator is on. And one thing to note is that a lot of times representatives have less committee assignments than your senators. So, for example, if I went to my senator's page, I see a lot more assignments. And the reason why this is a lot of the time is because there are more people in the House of Representatives, so there's more people able to take on the different jobs than there are in the Senate. So senators often have to take on more of a committee membership load. And then finally, when it comes to your legislator, you're going to want to make sure you check if they are in leadership. So you can go back to the legislators tab, and this time you're going to go and look at the legislative leadership part, and you can look through all leadership. And you can see here a very comprehensive list of who is in House leadership and also who is in Senate leadership. So, for example, you can scroll down. Let's say I'm looking for my senator. My senator is Senator Rush. Great. I can see that my senator is Senate Majority Whip and use that in your advocacy in the future. Okay. So there are some reasons why we're actually doing this, why we're going through all the effort of looking through to see if our senators and representatives are in leadership or not. But for now, I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to write down this key information in your worksheet, whether you have that printed or as a document, as a doc file, things like that. You can take a few minutes. What we're going to ask you to focus on right now, because it's kind of the most pressing information you need, is their names, of course, but also their emails, their phone numbers, um, and you can get started on some of their committees and positions. So you can take a few minutes to do that. The salaries you can do on your own time. It does take a little bit more work, a little bit more looking through to figure that out, but it is linked directly in the worksheet. So you'll be able to find that information there.
Yeah, this was an example sheet I did with my own reps. And the lack of transparency about how much each representative is paid is a huge part of the work that we're doing. It was so hard to find this. I had to separately look up how much pay representatives get for those positions and then add them up with a calculator. So yeah, just right now, like Sydney said, even just looking at a couple of positions your representative and senator are on, we can worry about the other pieces later. Also, feel free to pop in the chat if you find anything interesting. Like if your senator or rep is a member of leadership. Oh, look at that. I was getting ahead of myself. Just seeing a question in the chat, when you see checking if they're a member of leadership, a little more insight. Yeah, that's a great question. So one feature of our legislature is that we have a lot of leaders, leadership of either of the two parties comes with a lot of perks. And these positions are kind of handed out as ways to incentivize loyalty. One of my favorite features of our leadership is that there's 5 Republican members or 6 Republican members of the Senate, and there's 4 assistant minority leaders. So basically every senator that's a Republican has a leadership position. And you'll notice that there's a lot more leadership positions than there are in the US Congress, for example. So these are really the folks that have a lot of control over the movement of legislation. We have tremendous power, hierarchies of power in the Massachusetts legislature. So a lot of these faces are some of the folks that are really involved in the lawmaking, while many rank and file representatives are disempowered. So if you've got someone on this list, it's something to keep in mind, because they would have a real conduit to the halls of power.
Yeah. So kind of on that topic, so why are we actually talking about this? Why is it important to know whether or not your legislator has a leadership commission or position, I should say? It can really help influence your advocacy approach. So if you're going to your senator or representative, you're going to kind of want to see, are they on a committee, for example, that aligns with the issue I want to bring to the table? Or you could do it the reversed way, where it's who is on this committee that concerns my issue? If I'm bringing an issue that has to do with, for example, wage theft, then I want to go to see who's on the Committee of Labor and Workforce Development, because that's often the committee that's going to kind of deal with that. And then another thing you can do if you really don't know who you can reach out to, who actually is on a committee that has to do with your priority bill, is by just looking to see where your legislators are in terms of leadership positions. You can think, well, what can I advocate for in my district? So that way I have a direct contact about a specific issue where I can make an impact. And then I can go out and find other people who have direct contacts for the issue that I had in the first place. And leadership is a tool that is used by our um, representatives and senators, or more specifically by the Senate president and the Speaker of the House, because they're the ones who get to decide, all right, I'm going to give so and so this position on the committee of whatever because they are kind of in my favor right now. But a lot of times, once our legislators, if they kind of act out of line, so to speak, if they do something like vote on a bill that the Speaker of the House originally didn't want them to vote on, then they can often kind of be punished. They can have these leadership positions taken away, which can also have parts of their salaries taken away, given that with leadership positions, with committee positions comes stipends. All right. So the next thing we're going to be going over is how to find a bill. But before we do that, let's kind of just talk about what a bill is. So a bill in kind of more lay terms is a proposed new law or proposed alteration to an existing law. Um, but what we really want to pay attention to is kind of the names of these bills as well. So bills can get their names in a number of different ways. For example, they can have their names derived from shorthand names. So a key example would be when it comes to wage theft. We can kind of go to the homepage. We can navigate to bills and laws. And then you can also search for a bill. So let's say I'm thinking of a bill that has to do with wage theft. I'm going to type that keyword search, and then I will see all of the bills that have something to do with wage theft for this session. But a lot of the times, there's going to be bills that have names that don't really have anything to do with what they are doing specifically. So there are bills, for example, like the Safe Communities Act, which is actually called an act to protect the civil rights and safety of all Massachusetts residents. So this is an example of a name coming from kind of the outcome of a bill or a way for the bill's positive connotations or positive results to kind of be at the forefront of this bill's PR campaign, so to speak, not in a way that is negative, but in a way that really puts the bill's best foot forward. You can also do something that I really like to do. So if I'm not really sure what the actual number of the bill is, how I'm going to identify what the name is, I like to go to trusted advocacy organizations' websites and look through their legislative priorities. So, for example, if you go to our website, which unfortunately isn't up to date with this session's information, you can still look and see which bills are being advocated for by these organizations. And oftentimes you can find other key information about what the bills would do. But in the example of wage theft, I can scroll down and see, all right, I know another advocacy organization that I can then look to find their legislative priorities. And I can do a keyword search, say, I wonder if they're supporting any bills that have to do with wage theft. And you can find a lot of key information here. You can find the bill number, you can find the bill name, you can find the bill's sponsors, and then also a summary. So now that I have all that information from advocacy organizations, or maybe I already knew this information, sometimes it's helpful to go and to the refiners, so the filters, when you know which branch of government you really, or which branch within the state house you really want to look through, and also if you know the sponsor. So I know that the bill I'm looking for is in the Senate, and I know that the sponsor is Senator DiDomenico. And that really helps you figure out which bill you're looking for. So when you go to the bill page, you're going to see a lot of information. Other bills have more key information, but I will go into that in a minute. You can view the text of the bill, but the text of the actual bill is oftentimes super long, super confusing because we don't know the general laws like the back of our hand. We don't know what the language changes are or what things are being added and taken out. So that's not really helpful. That's another reason why it's good to look to trusted advocacy organizations, especially if the bill doesn't have a plain text summary. You can look through the bill's history, so you can see where the bill has been, where it has gone, where it currently is, things like that. And then you can also see petitioners. So petitioners are another word for co-sponsors. And when your legislator co-sponsors a bill, like I said before, it means that they've signed their name onto it and they said, I support this. But oftentimes that's not enough. What needs to be done is your legislator actually has to advocate within the state house for this bill. And that is another thing you can ask them. All right. So you can also see where the bill is currently. This bill has been referred to the Joint Committee on Labor and Workforce Development. So one of the ways you can look to see the committees is by clicking the hyperlinks, and then it will take you to the home page. Another way to do this is by going up to the Committees and Commissions page. You can go to Joint Committees or Senate or House committees, but the Senate and House committees oftentimes deal with less bills than the joint committees. And you can look through and say, I'm looking for labor and workforce development, and then click there. So on this page, you can find more key information. For example, who are the members of this committee? So that's something that you might have on your worksheet right now. You might have, I know my representative is on this committee, and that's definitely important to note. But what we're looking for specifically is where our bill is. So our bill is called S1300. The S because it is originating in the Senate, and if it were originating in the House, it would have been labeled with an H and then the numbers. So I'm going to look through, I'm going to see S1300. And unfortunately, there's no hearing scheduled, so I can't really do anything about that right now. But I can also see what has been reported out of committee. And a lot of times when you look to see what has been reported out of committee, you can see a lot more key information. So you can see, for example, committee votes that were taken. In this case, on an act relative to workplace psychological safety, you're going to be able to see how Senate members of Joint Committee on Labor and Workforce Development have voted on this bill. And you can see that they voted favorably on this, and it's ought to pass. When it's reported out of committee, that means it's being sent to oftentimes a different committee. In this case, it's Ways and Means. And a lot of bills are going to have to go through Ways and Means either in the Senate or House at one point because Ways and Means deals with anything that has to do with money. And you'll be able to see the bill then on that page of bills in committee. You can also see a lot of times with bills that have already had hearings or been voted on the summaries. So this is a plain text summary, and that's helpful in understanding what's going on in the bill. So you don't have to go through the text, which is very complicated at times. And then the last thing on the committee page is the hearings tab. So the hearings tab is also very helpful because then you can see number one, how active this committee has been. If this committee hasn't been active and your legislator is a member of this committee, you can reach out to them and kind of bring that to their attention. You could say, there are some key pieces of legislation currently in committee, but no action has been taken. There's no hearing scheduled. What can we do about that? What can you do about that as my legislator? And aside from that, you can click on the specific hearings and look through to see which bills have been heard in each hearing. You can also see some key information if you would like to go in person to give testimony, which is usually on the left-hand side of the screen. And you could also see ways that you can submit written testimony, which oftentimes has later deadlines than the actual hearing to give ample time to kind of submit testimony. They also have the actual recording of the hearings and attendees. So if you're thinking to yourself, well, I know that this bill I care about has already had a hearing. I want to see if my legislator was there since they're on this committee. You can look and see if they were there or if they were not there. And the final thing before I hand this over to Scotia is going to be the hearings and events page. So when you click on that tab, you can look and see the actual hearings calendar. You can look through and see if maybe there is a committee hearing that you would like to attend to give testimony at. And it's a great way to just kind of see the overall picture of the hearings that are going on in the State House. All right. So now that we've done that, I'm going to actually hand it over to Scotia, and she's going to go a bit more in depth on omnibus bills, which can be very complicated at times, but the way she explains it helps break it down on the website.
Thank you, Sydney. Yeah, so we just saw a great presentation about the movement of typical bills through the legislature. So being able to follow a bill, which traditionally meant a particular piece of language that would reveal something about our representatives' policy positions. But unfortunately, that's not how most legislation is being passed these days in the Massachusetts state legislature. So you might be familiar with this trend, but we're seeing, next slide, more and more legislation being passed, more and more policy changes being passed as they're tacked onto budget bills or larger pieces of legislation that are crafted by committees. So on the left, here's an analysis from our friends at Progressive Mass that analyzed the bills that were passed during the last session, which was a session that got us ranked last in the entire country for legislative effectiveness. So we passed among the least number of bills, of all 50 states. And what were those bills? So it looks like 76% of them only applied to a single city or town. Then, the next largest percentage applied to a single person, a single state employee. And for bills that pertain to policy changes or budgets, there was 8 budgets and 28 other bills passed. So we're seeing that, most policy changes are not being made via the passage of these individual bills anymore. Most of them are made by tacking on policy riders to budget bills or crafting these enormous omnibus bills in committee. And this has real impacts on our ability to do advocacy. It makes it harder to see that co-sponsorships mean anything, because so often these individual bills are not actually the ones that travel through the process. It also means that we can't necessarily build support for a particular piece of legislation through the committee hearing process. Instead, it concentrates power in those members of leadership that we were seeing on that leadership page. They're the folks that get to write the bills and decide, whose language makes it into these enormous giant page bills. So here's a quote from one of our scoops last year about the impacts that this has. Just saying that, it forces advocacy groups to focus on their efforts on currying favor with the few members of leadership responsible for putting those omnibus bills together, rather than being able to play the numbers game amongst the rank and file. And it also makes it really hard to track through the process. So I'm just going to show a quick graphic, and then we'll look at what an omnibus bill looks like on the website so that it's easier to follow these along. So an omnibus bill was recently passed by the Senate. It's called the Massachusetts Data Privacy Act. You might have read about it in one of our Saturday scoops. And this was actually an omnibus bill. So it started as 3 bills that were assigned to the Joint Committee on Advanced Information Technology, the Internet, and Cybersecurity from January of this year. I'll note that the bills were filed in January, and it took them 2 months to be assigned to a committee. If you've been reading our scoops, you know that we're having the slowest legislative session in over 40 years. And slow-moving legislation is certainly going to be a theme of this slide. They were all assigned to the Joint Committee on Advanced Information Technology, the Internet, and Cybersecurity, which processed them and turned those 3 bills into an omnibus bill. This was Bill S2516. So you'll note that it got a completely new number. It was 71 pages long. The committee voted that out, so we got a committee vote there. And in May, it was moved to the Committee on Senate Ways and Means. So most bills, especially big bills, anything that pertains to funds being used, usually passes through either House or Senate Ways and Means. So Ways and Means got it in May. Then they were working on it. They voted out a version that is now entitled S2608. And I'll note that all of these bills have different pages, so it makes it a little bit hard to follow, but that's why we're breaking this down. And another thing that is important to note is just that the only phase where this bill got a public hearing was in the where any of these bills got a public hearing was when they were still in the Joint Committee on Advanced Information Technology, the Internet, and Cybersecurity. So, each of the 3 individual bills that started, the public was able to give expertise on those. But when they craft omnibus bills in committee, there's no additional chance where the public gets to give specific information. Obviously, we can contact our reps, ask them to influence leadership. But you can see that the bill that was perhaps based on public input was then shortened from 71 pages to 34 pages. We don't know, what all was taken out. And then the new bill S2608 in September moved to the full Senate. So it was brought to the Senate floor. Senators did amendments on it, and then it was finally engrossed by the Senate, and it became Bill S2619. So you've seen it, it's gone through many iterations, and I'm gonna now demonstrate what this looks like on the legislature's website. So bear with me. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Great. So here we can see the final bill that was passed by the Senate. So we can see passed to be engrossed. This is where we can get a roll call, so we can see how our representative actually voted on it. This passed unanimously. So it was, it doesn't tell us much. Everybody supported it. And we can see that it's now been referred to House Ways and Means. So, this is going to basically skip the public hearing process in the House. It's going straight to a committee staffed by members of leadership. We can see, the roll call vote. And then when we see an omnibus bill, what's helpful is to follow it back through the process, essentially, because on here, we don't see the committee vote. We don't see the history ahead of September. We have to click to the previous version of the bill in order to get that. So this is the bill that saw all the amendments on the Senate floor. And this information is helpful as well. So we can see, what amendments our representatives voted on, whether they were rejected or accepted. There's quite a few that were accepted. And you can click on the text of the amendment to know basically what the amendment said. You can also see the list of amendments here, so you can filter them. That's a little bit easier. So, for example, I know that our organization was supporting several amendments that were done by Senator Roush. I can see them here by searching that several of them were withdrawn, quite a few were adopted. But I'm still not seeing the committee votes or the bill summary that would give me some more information about what this bill does. For that, I'm going to have to go back one further to the previous version of the bill. And here we get a lot more information. So here I can see that this bill started as 3 bills in this joint committee. I can see that it did get some co-sponsors while it was being put together by those 2 committees. And yeah, for some reason, the votes of both committees are portrayed on this page, even though the version of that Ways and Means voted forward is now named a new bill. It's not a perfect system, obviously. So yeah, here you have the committee vote for Senate Ways and Means, and here in an attachment, which you have to download, is the committee vote for the original joint committee. So here's where we can find a bit of information about it. We also have the committee summary, so you can download this, and it gives a little bit more background on the bill and the actual changes that it would make. So my best advice for when you're dealing with an omnibus bill, you might see in the news that something has passed through the House and want to be able to follow it in the Senate. Want to be able to follow it on the legislature's website to see how your legislator actually voted on it. Just make sure that you click through to the previous versions of the bill where you will be able to find a little bit more information about its progress through Senate and House. Reserve right, just responding quickly to a sentence in the chat, just means that the person neglected to take an opinion on the bill. So we can see that in this case, all of the Democrats on the committee voted that it ought to pass, and 2 Republican senators reserved their rights. So they neglected to take a position on whether or not the bill should go forward. You'll see this a lot more often than you'll see adverse. So often if someone doesn't support a bill, they still don't want to be on record to their constituents as not supporting it. So they'll just say, I didn't take a position. It's another way of kind of avoiding accountability. Yeah, can we go back to the slide, Sydney?
Yep. There's just one more question in the chat that says, what is the difference between a bill and a docket?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in another confusing feature of the legislature, when bills are first filed, they receive a docket number. So it'll say HD or SD. And when it's considered meaningfully filed, so, bills go through a process right at the beginning of the session, where they're assigned to a committee, et cetera. And at some point during that process, it receives a completely new number, which is now its official number. So briefly, it has a docket number, which is like its practice number. But that makes it very confusing, especially at the beginning of the session, because you have to learn 2 numbers. It has a D in front of it. It's a little bit confusing. Yeah, this is a great time to stop for questions. Does anybody have any additional questions at this time? I know that we threw a lot at you. Yeah, sure. How to know if a bill is an omnibus bill? Well, usually if a bill's not an omnibus bill, so a bill that passes through the legislature here. Let me take share screen back, Sydney. Here's another helpful feature that we'll just cover. So you've probably heard me say a couple times, in the scoop or something like that, I'll remark on how many laws that we've passed in this session or not. So far since January. And the way to find that, so if you're wondering, has this law already been passed this session? How many laws have we passed this session? You can find that in session laws right here. So we're going to look at session laws, and then we want all the laws for the year of 2025. So these are all the laws that the legislature has enacted so far this year. So a lot of these are omnibus bills, like a giant budget. But something like a sick leave bank is unlikely to be an omnibus bill. And so we can look at what it looks like here. So if it has a longer bill history and it hasn't been referred from another bill, so it doesn't have another bill number at the top, then it's likely still an individual bill. most now, will say that they've been reported by X committee, and have gone through quite a few iterations by the time they make it to this page of being enacted. Great. All right, we're just going to keep going. You want to go back to the
Yes, I can do that.
Rules suspended means that they suspended their rules. So they just said, all our rules don't count for this. Usually that's when they want to pass something quicker, or they want to do it in a way that is not in accordance with legislative rules. So they can vote to suspend their rules. Now we're just going to transition into tips for contacting your representative. So putting some of this knowledge that we've gained tonight, putting some of the things that we've been able to fill out on our worksheet, or that we will fill out later, into action by talking to our representatives. So first tip, we can use the resource that we've created together. So some of the pieces of this, will be extremely relevant to understanding your representative's role in power dynamics. So for example, if they're a Democrat, you can use the Democratic Party platform as a tool of accountability. So if my representative is a Democrat, I know that I can ask them, if they support things that are in the Democratic Party platform. Maybe that's something I mention in my message to them. If they've been in office for a really long time, they've seen the legislature pass through multiple speakerships. That's a piece of information that I can use in addressing my legislator. And then their committees and positions, as Sydney said at the beginning, that's such critical information for knowing, your conduits to certain pieces of policy working through the House. So my representative sits on the municipalities and governance committee. So I know that if there's a bill up there, I am empowered as a constituent because my rep is on that committee. So those are some things that you can use in crafting your addresses to them. One thing always to keep in mind is strength in numbers. So, sending an email to your representative is really awesome. We always say they don't hear from their constituents as much as members of Congress do. So sending an email really, really makes a difference. But if you get 5 neighbors to do it with you, that makes even more of a difference. So there's always strength in numbers, especially if it's a group of constituents with similar interests. One thing to keep in mind is that healthy constituent legislator relationships require skepticism. Ultimately, they are working for us. And we do have a gap. We have a bias towards our own legislators. So this was a really interesting poll where 32% of those polled said that their legislator wasn't corrupt. Only 32% said that their legislator was corrupt, but 52% said most legislators are corrupt. So we have a bias towards the people that, graduated from our same high school or whatever. So just keep in mind that the state house is broken, and even our own legislators can and should step up and do more. We can always ask more of them. So 4 steps for powerful, accountable grassroots lobbying. We're going to go through these one at a time. Number 1, always have a hard ask. Number 2, don't stop at co-sponsorship. We can always escalate. Number 3, ask for questions and fact check. And number 4 is make and communicate a plan to follow up. And I'm going to pass it off to Sydney for step number 1.
Yeah, so the hard ask. What is that? It's important to come to your representative with specific demands. And what a hard ask is a specific demand. So what are some of the elements that are important to include in this? You're going to really want to give context on the necessity of the command. You're also going to want to highlight how not only you benefit from what you're asking for, but how your legislator benefits and how other constituents of your legislator benefit. You're also going to want to limit the possibility of no as an answer as much as you can, but it's also important to just make sure that your demand has a yes or no answer. And you're going to want to keep asking. This isn't something you're going to ask once if it doesn't work out and then say, well, I don't really know what else to do from there. So kind of seeing some of the elements of the hard ask in action. An example of a not so great demand is something that really isn't demanding. So if you say, we urge you to support this, and don't give any kind of guidelines as to how your legislator can support an issue or support a bill, then they're not going to take action, most likely, because they're not going to be able to say, well, I did do this. I did exactly what you asked because you didn't really ask for anything exact. A much better way to do it is to have a well-formulated ask with some context behind it. So you can say, ensuring the right to unionize and to work in a safe and equitable environment would allow our state house employees, for example, to better serve Massachusetts in a number of ways that are ways that you've talked about previously with your legislator. You will end by saying, will you support their efforts by co-sponsoring whichever bill is in the chamber that they're in, so Senate or House, because that actually gives you something where you can get a yes or no answer and where you can check that answer. You can check the website and see, have they co-sponsored this bill or have they not co-sponsored this bill? So why are we asking them this anyway? We really need to understand and like take to heart, as I like to say, that these conversations go both ways, that there's two really key reasons why we ask these questions. The first is that you're alerting your legislator to an issue and you're able to actually hold them accountable on it. And the second is that your legislator then feels empowered to act. If they know they have the backing of their constituents behind them, they feel more empowered to act, sometimes in ways that don't exactly align with the wishes of, for example, the Speaker of the House.
All right. Next, we're going to talk about going beyond co-sponsorship. So like Sydney said, co-sponsorship is a useful tool. It's one way for us to know that our legislators are willing to put their name on something. But next slide. Yeah, we think it's necessary but not sufficient. So as we saw, in the example with the bills from last session, ultimately only, about 30 bills that could have a co-sponsor have made it all the way to the end. So co-sponsorships are not always useful materially for actually getting bills to a vote. And because leadership has such tremendous control over what bills actually make it to a floor for a vote, reps are really infrequently asked to take hard positions on bills. Some reps will co-sponsor bills and then privately say that they would never vote for them if they came to the floor for a vote. So it's all about going beyond co-sponsorship. We want to start there, but we have asks prepared to go beyond it. So we've got some ideas, for example, to escalate your ask. So in your discussions with your representative, one thing you can ask is if they would commit to testifying in favor of the bill at a hearing if it's scheduled. You can also ask them to go public with their support. So will you send a public letter to the chairs of the committee asking them to report on this bill? And now you know how to look up the chairs of a committee. Or you can say, Representative, will you send a public letter to the Speaker, Senate President, calling on them to bring this bill to a vote? And again, knowing whether or not your representative is a member of leadership could be really helpful for formulating this ask.
All right. So sometimes there are barriers in the conversations you're having with your legislators. So one of these um, things we try to avoid is legislating. And what that really is the tactics used by your legislators to preserve the status quo, to avoid committing to an actual position on something, and also to avoid responsibility. So there's some different ways that this can be done. So when you're in a conversation with your representative or senator, they might try to transfer responsibility. You could come to them saying, we need, for example, the good government agenda, which is a set of three key bills that we are sponsoring in the State House, which would help bring more transparency and accountability to Beacon Hill. If you come to them saying that and you say, we really need to have, for example, a State House union so that employees can advocate for themselves and work in better working conditions, they might try to say, well, I treat all State House employees with the utmost respect, but I can't say the same for my colleagues. Maybe try asking them. Or they might say, nobody else is telling me about this. It clearly isn't a concern of my constituents. Things like this, where they're just trying to say, you know what, it's really not my problem. I don't understand why you're coming to me with this issue. Another example is derailing the conversation. So that's just when they totally are responding to your clear demands in ways that have nothing to do with your demand. So if you say, I would like to see uh, better equity for state house employees, they might say, well, I'm working on a bill to address racial inequalities in maternal health care right now and things like that. So if they're trying to say, you know what, I'm doing a great job on other things, this can kind of take the back burner. That is a big red flag. Punting the conversation. This often has to do with scheduling. So we know that a legislative session lasts 2 years here in Massachusetts. They might try to argue, you know what, I just need more time to think on it. Come back in a few weeks, and then they don't really follow up. Or you do come back in a few weeks, and then they say, you know what, it's actually budget season. Come back in a few weeks, and then they'll say, you know what, no, it's tax season. Things like that. And so all of a sudden, it's been 2 years, and they say, you know what? You're going to have to come back next session. That's another serious red flag. And it's important to note, unless they're on a Ways and Means committee, they're really not that busy during budget season or as busy as they might try to make it seem. So that's one thing to keep note of. And finally, the lying, gaslighting, and patronizing is exactly what it sounds like. It's any other way that they're going to try to imply that you only support a piece of legislation because you don't know any better, or they know better than you and they are not taking a stand or not taking action for a reason that they think is valid. So, how are we going to stop this? How are we going to deflect this? There's three key steps in deflecting legislating. The first is to call it out, let them know that you've caught their bluff and call that out to them. You could say, we know that there are lots of bills, but that's not the bill we're asking for right now. We're concerned about one specific issue. Second, you want to go big picture. So you want to say why you're there and why you're bringing this issue to their attention, what the circumstances surrounding this issue are. An example of this is by saying, well, we, as your constituents, are supporting this bill because we know for a fact that state house employees have been seeking better working conditions. Things like that. And finally, you're going to repeat your hard ask. So you go back to the same demand you said before. If they give you a wishy-washy answer or if they try to legislate their way out of it, you will say, will you support their efforts by co-sponsoring these bills, or this bill rather? And to just keep in mind, it's important to know your issue because it also helps you feel more confident when you're going to speak with your representative or senator. You want to make sure you know some of the counter arguments that they could potentially throw at you as you're going to advocate for a bill or on an issue. It's also important to think through the different ways your legislator can use legislating tactics against you and against your issue. And just make sure you stick to your hard ask. There's a reason it's a hard ask. You really want the yes or no answer. And if you don't get that, try again.
And for the last step, this is making a plan to follow up. So if when you've had a communication with your representative, maybe you've made the hard ask, you have gotten a commitment for them or not, it's important to have steps to do afterwards, so that they know that this is a relationship of accountability that continues. So checking in on progress, we can use some of the skills that we learned today about navigating the legislature's website to see, for example, when a committee vote is posted and contact our senator. Dear Senator Creighton, thank you for voting to move the Data Privacy Act out of committee. It's important to have carrots as well as sticks. Legislators respond well to affirmation as well as disappointment. So, letting them know that you're checking in on everything that they're doing. For example, if your representative in a communication with you made a commitment to writing a letter to the speaker, or writing a public letter to the chairs, make sure you follow up to make sure that's done. And then, we can use our information about what committees our representative sits on to also get key information about when legislation we support is going to be moved. So the wage theft bill that Sydney was talking about at the beginning, has sat now for 9 months without being assigned to a hearing. And so I could contact my senator who sits on the Labor and Workforce Development Committee, which I learned while doing research for this workshop, to ask him, Dear Senator DiDomenico, do you know when we can expect to see a hearing for this bill that I care about? One special tip is to include their aide. So if you email your representative, you might hear back from your legislator's aide. This can be really helpful for getting, just a point of contact between you and your rep. Usually when I email my legislator, I include their aide. It's like a nice personal touch, and then you might hear back a little bit quicker. Next. And it's important to maintain momentum. So to pass major legislation, we can use our constituent power, but it's best used if it's constant and escalating. So, starting with an email ask is really important. And then we can take it one step further by, asking our friends to send an email ask. Maybe we want to get a couple of constituents together to have a lobby meeting. Maybe we're going to do a letter to the editor campaign in the local newspaper. We could invite our representative to have a public forum about the issue. And finally, if it means doing a standing outside with the sign that says, please patch wage theft, these are all tools available to us, especially when we're well informed about what's going on. So strength in numbers. But you don't need to be well informed to ask things of our representatives. We're right up against the time. So thank you guys so much for joining. We are happy to have address any questions for folks that can stay on. And I'll put our email in the chat for anyone else that wants to follow up with questions. Two things that I just wanted to flag for folks on here tonight. We have one huge, really important reform that we're supporting right now is to reform the stipend system in the House. So it's one of the ways that members of leadership kind of control and maintain power over the membership. And we're going to be hosting a really short 30-minute training on signature gathering next Tuesday. So if you want to rejoin us on Zoom, we're going to be meeting again on Tuesday. And final thing is just a reminder to sign up for the Saturday Scoop, which is our weekly newsletter. So thank you guys so much. I want to give a big shout out to Sydney, who did a huge work putting this workshop together. Happy to take questions now for those who can stay on. Thanks so much. I see someone's getting signatures at the No Kings Worcester. Thanks so much, Jen. We will definitely send out copies of the presentation. We're going to do a recording. Any last words, Sydney?
Nope. Just thank you all for being here and taking the time to learn more about how you can advocate for the issues that you care about.
Excellent. Well,